Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on which part of the world you have signed in from. Welcome to this very interesting webinar we have today. This is a platform that is being promoted by IBS Intelligence, and this webinar today, this edition is sponsored by IXC. And the topic that we are actually running on this session today is a very, very interesting one. I guess, let's say, the most spoken or the most discussed topic, the changing digital landscape. And I know that many of you are able to connect with this given the COVID situation. But I guess what would be very interesting today in our discussion is dump this into a conversation focused on what does it mean from an SME banking standpoint. And I believe this is important for us in a couple of ways. One is obviously SME banking historically has always been seen as an area that is, let's say, stuck in between the corporate and the retail space, and the ambit of the digital has actually made the proposition much more stronger. But more importantly, what we are seeing now is a lot of change, a lot of developments that we will actually be discussing with our panelists we have on the call today. So without much delay, why don't I quickly introduce my fellow panelists on this call. We actually have David, who is the head of customer experience and platform development at National Bank of Fujairah. David comes with more than 25 years of experience with his particular areas of interest and focus being in digital transformation, cryptocurrencies and blockchain, that is his area of interest, e-commerce, payments. He has to his credit, he founded the first P2P payments system in Italy. And he was, prior to his current role with the National Bank of Fujairah, he was the CEO for Noon Payments. He's also a co-founder of Noon Payments. And in his earlier avatar, he was the head of e-payments at UBA Banca. David, thank you for joining us today and welcome on board.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me.
My second panelist today, Yanis, he's joining us today from Athens in Greece. He is the CEO for Zerar Consultants, which is a firm that focuses and specializes in technology consulting for banks and financial institutions. But his more important experience that I want to share with all of you today is he was a general manager and also a member of the board at Piraeus Bank in Greece. Comes with more than 33 years, if I'm not wrong, Yanis, of experience.
Yeah, you're right.
And he actually, not only has he been working in this field of computer science and information technology, but to his credit, he actually comes with a master's qualification from the University of South Carolina, California, in the area of computer science. So I got to watch you, Yanis. Thank you again for joining us today. Yeah.
Good morning to everybody.
And my third panelist today to introduce is Sagar. For those of you who are in the space of banking technology, he is somewhat a familiar face, especially in the area of banks, and not just in one region. Over the last 24 years, Sagar has worked, I'm seeing, in Central Europe, in Middle East, in Africa, in Asia, and I'm told he is next taking on Antarctica. Is that right, Sagar? Sagar joins us from Bombay. He is the sales and strategy head, the vice president at IXC. Thank you, Sagar, for joining us on the call today.
Thanks, Ram. Greetings, everyone.
So without much ado and delay, if I may maybe start the discussion today, and I do see we have attendees joining in, and there's a number of them on there. Maybe just to set the tone for the discussion today, why don't we start with a small poll where we could actually have all attendees to actually poll on what we would rate as, let's see what we have as the poll one. So there you go. What would you rate as the most important success factor? Is it the voice of customer? Is it the prioritization? Is it the people and change management, or is it building your technology capabilities? Let's see. So David, in your experience, what have you seen as the latest experience that you have done? I know a lot of work has been happening on the SME onboarding front, and you've seen all these 4 areas coming in as challenges. Would you think all these 4 matter?
Oh, Ram, I think that, reading the points you mentioned, voice of customer, technology, prioritization, and people, right? If I recall it, because of course I vote. I made my vote. And to be honest, in my view, in our experience, all this kind of 4 points are really, really important. If I tell you, if I would rank this kind of points, this kind of topic,
I'll hold you
especially
for a minute, because I do want to make sure that we don't bias our audience.
Oh, you're right. Yeah. Good point. Good point.
I still see we have about 30% people more to vote. If I can encourage everyone who's on the call to complete the voting, we have another 30 seconds, and then we will jump back into the panel. Yeah. But I guess what is interesting is that you would think all the 4 seem to be critical. Yeah, that's what you're saying, David.
Yeah, I think so. To be honest, I will not add or remove something. They are pretty important. Yeah.
Interesting.
But I will tell you after the results, which is the most important for me.
Excellent. So we're going to end the poll now, and now let's see what the results are. And I am going to share the results. We see the voice of customer taking the lion's share of the votes. That is indeed the voice of the customers here in the webinar. So that's 56%.
Actually, it's easy now to say that was right, because I didn't tell you, but, but I was thinking, this kind of point. And to be honest, in our experience, we built completely an entire new paradigm on this kind of aspect, because we launched, we are live actually with our SME platform that we start to build last year. It's called mbfconnect.mbf.ae, where essentially we build the platform completely from scratch, having the customer with us, that we're building phase by phase the entire platform. The paradigm that I mentioned to you is completely opposite from the paradigm that usually a classic bank can do. A classic bank, what is doing is make some assumption about what the usually, then build completely the platform or the product, having in mind this kind of needs and knowledge, and then deliver into the market. But nowadays, I think that the new technology and I would say how much is advanced the customer compared the previous times, you have to consider from the beginning the point of view of the customer. That's why we decide to create we decide to be the enabler of our customers, to let our customer to build their own platform. We are just being the enabler to try to translate the needs and the feedbacks that we had from the community in developing the platform. So I think that this is something that was, to be honest, risky at the beginning, because there was it's an experiment pretty unique. I know that we had an experiment in the retail space where a digital bank, especially in Italy, is called Widiba, made something like that, building in 18 months a digital bank entirely with the community, and engaging the community and try to create the feature that they wanted from the beginning, right? But interacting with them. So, but they did with retail. But on the SME, that is a specific target, we are dealing with owner of business that they are completely focus on their business every single minute of the day, it's not easy. It's not easy. So that the idea was, let's create a community where we can open community where we can have our customer, non-customer, whatever, and let's try to engage them in our project and let them to be engaged in their community, asking them every day the kind of needs that they have. We map the needs, we map their wishes, their desires that they have in mind, and we build. Of course, in phases, because we started from scratch. We started with, then we went through MVP, a minimum version of the platform, in which we started to, again, also collect some feedbacks in the usage of the platform, and then going through different phases in which we going through the perfection of the customer needs.
Having gone through this journey, David, I mean, if I may just ask a question, having gone through this journey more recently, and if you had to actually talk about what people generally tend to miss or overlook or ignore when they actually go through this digital onboarding journey of, particularly for SMEs, what would come up in the list as the number one or number two?
What is missed sometimes? What is missed is the point of view of the customer and the feedback from the customer. It's easy. I mean, you can engage at the beginning, asking what do you think, what you would like to have. But then after you started the development, at the end, when you deliver, when you're going live with the platform, it's difficult to again stay engaged with the customer and asking more feedbacks, because it's not perfect at the beginning, as you can imagine. It's the first version. And the deal is, the challenge is to try to really get them engaged after the first version. I think that is something that is sometimes missed. What could be overlooked maybe is the leveraging. Be convinced that technology can fix your problem, can completely overcome every kind of single problem in the. But it's not like that.
It's a very passionate topic for you. You know, e-commerce is, and you referred the word ecosystem twice when you mentioned about it, and even in my conversation earlier with you. Talk to me about how SMEs can be a part of the larger ecosystem. Your favorite platformification as a concept. Share with us, what you believe is the way forward.
You mean what will be in the future, or how we try to deal with this kind of paradigm?
I guess both the questions.
I mean, yeah. What we again, it was an experiment at the beginning, and every day we are changing to try to fit with this kind of paradigm. Because when you are dealing with a community, things are changing very quickly, and the only thing that you have to do is to be quick and try to adapting as much as you can. But at the beginning, the point we are trying to create a good vibe, first of all, create engagement in a community, try to really convince that we were just the enabler. We were not the classic player that want to sell or use the community, leveraging the interest. It was not like that at the beginning, neither now. It's not like that. This is not the point. The point is that trying to serve the community and try to leveraging your skills, your knowledge, to create something that they want, and be an enabler to let them to feel that they are doing something for them.
Any examples you want to share before we?
The point that the first thing is that we are pretty convinced, and they know these kind of things that I'm saying. Is being aware that it is being part of a ecosystem. Right. That everyone talking about what is a ecosystem. But the point is that when a small business owner is doing something, is delivering a service, not just to the market is part of the ecosystem. Other business owner is part of the ecosystem, and between themselves can exchange also some view, some knowledge base, this is one of the pillars that our platform is based on, because it's leveraging on our knowledge as a bank, but it's leveraging also the knowledge of our of the community, of the entire platform. If you are able to create a good balance of balancing the interests of each single group of the participant in the platform, then potentially you're doing well.
Almost moving into community banking, as they call it. Yeah, very interesting, right?
Yeah.
Ecosystem of sorts where everybody is a member. Well, David, I guess I'm going to come back to you with a bunch of questions as audience is asking. But thank you again. I mean, very insightful experiences. Thanks a lot. Yeah.
Thank you, Jim.
So before we jump into the next panelist, Yanis, maybe we'll have another poll, if I may, which is actually on another question altogether, where since David talked about digital journey of banks, let's see what the audience has to say on the biggest challenge in the digital journey of banks when they are particularly focusing on the SME sector. Is it about delivering a best-in-class user experience? Is it about driving an end-to-end digital fulfillment? Is the challenge really about building new products, or is it about managing technology deployment? Let's see what the audience has to say. And even while the poll is on, there is something interesting here for us to understand how the definition of SME sits around the world. And you can see there are various definitions out there between different countries. And that's interesting that, by and large, we see the SME to be the sector that is driving employment and a significant GDP contributor. We'll come to that. And I could see Yanis obviously is very passionate about this topic. So I'm going to come into you in just 30 seconds, Yanis. We'll just wait for the poll to be over.
I just wanted to add an additional critical factor to the factors we discussed before for the success of a project like that. And that is top management commitment.
Right.
I've seen lots of projects fail because the management at the beginning believed in that, and then they lost focus or momentum, and they delegated the whole process to middle management, and the whole thing was lost. So the top management needs to be involved right from the start and continuously, and put pressure.
A chairman always says what is important to the supervisor is always important to the subordinate, right? And I think it's a very powerful statement. So, and I agree.
We're talking about banks, and usually it's very often that you find that the CEOs of banks are traditional bankers, and digitalization and digital channels is just another game to them. It's not, the actual banking that they are used to doing.
Well,
so it's very easy after the first difficulties to lose, the focus.
Absolutely, I agree. I see someone is raising a hand there. Maybe if you can pose a question, I can actually take the question out there. I think there's Vincenzo. I think I see some Italian connect out there, David, for you. Okay, so if I can go back to the poll, well, it's interesting. I think let's see the results there. What is the biggest challenge in the digital journey of banks focusing on SME sector? An overwhelming 61% have voted it to be driving an end-to-end digital fulfillment. Wow. That's an interesting takeaway out there. And maybe that brings me to a logical question for you then, Yanis, and it's actually about fulfillment and what fulfillment is all about in the context of what we are seeing in the industry. So maybe I'll start with, if I can ask you, and I think your favorite topic out there, that it's really about having the right buy-in and also making sure that you are not underestimating the effort. So if you can share some experiences and maybe, over to you.
First, let me set a few things that show what the environment of SME banking is today. So what are the needs of SMEs today? And by the way, SMEs in the European Union, according to Basel II and III, are companies that have a turnover of from 2.5 up to 50 million euros per year. And they employ more than 100 employees. Below that, they're classified as SBs, small businesses. But that, I suppose, varies from country to country. There are countries where, the majority of the companies are very small, like Greece and Portugal, for example. There are countries like Germany where you find a lot of the actual SMEs. Now, what are the needs of those companies as far as banking is concerned, not in general? First of all, they need to be able to conduct their payments. So they have payment obligations, they need to be able to do payments easily. Second, I would say, is merchant acquiring, the traditional acquiring cycle, where they're getting paid through credit cards, debit cards, and the money is settled to their accounts. Third, it's lending. They have lending needs, working capital or investment loans. Fourth, I would say it's trade finance. They need to order goods from their suppliers, they need to participate in tenders, and so on. And I would say the fifth one is cash management. Cash management includes the traditional cash management, but to me it also includes things like factoring and leasing. So they optimize their cash flows and their liquidity. The COVID-19 era has put an additional strain and hit on the SMEs across the world. The reason for that being is that as compared to the big companies are very diversified usually. Look at Apple, for example. Maybe they're losing out of iPhone sales, but they're gaining a lot because of their cloud offerings and their servicing they provide. So they have this diversification. The small companies cannot afford to be that much diversified. So if they're hit very hard. Look at tourism, for example, where tourism has suffered huge losses this year. Because of this extra strain they have suffered, they are, most of them, in need of new working capital. They have exhausted the lines they had in the past, and they are in need of restructuring of their lending obligations, loan obligations. So they need grace periods, they need a freeze of payments, they need all these instruments that the banks can offer. And of course, that's a new thing. In most countries, the government step in and offer supportive measures in terms of subsidies or loans or interest-free loans, etc. So they need to manage and participate in these government support schemes with the assistance of banks. Of course, the COVID-19 has also introduced new habits. So we've seen all across Europe and the world that many of the governmental agencies all of a sudden started working over the internet. In the past, for example, in order to get a certificate, you need to go to the tax authority, for example. You need to visit the tax authority, have an application and get something on paper. Now, all of a sudden, within 3 months, all this has been automated and digitalized. So new habits have happened to the SMEs, and they expect these habits to continue with the banks. You cannot have the government sector modernize, digitize itself, and have the banks being traditional.
Fascinating, fascinating.
In Europe, we have also, since 2 years now, 3 years maybe, the EIDAS regulation, which is a regulation that allows makes legal in the European Union for customers and people to sign contracts with digital certificates of a specific type, QES, but these contracts and documents and agreements can be presented in any court in the European Union and considered valid and legal. So that takes away an obstacle that was there in the past, that you could do a lot of things with a customer, but at the end of the day, in order to sign the legal contracts, you had to visit a branch. And that would break the whole digital process. In Europe, it just happens that most of the SMEs already have banking relations and already get some of these services from the banks through web mobile banking. So it's not a new thing. It's not the major thing for me in Europe. It's not how to onboard new customers. the onboarding mostly concerns startups, new companies that start now, but the existing SMEs, they already have a banking relationship.
Correct.
And most of the banks in Europe, I mean, I cannot think even of a single bank that doesn't have a web mobile banking that the customers can use. Now, the quality and the offering through these channels varies. Lastly, we have also the PSD2 regulation in Europe, which obliges banks to open up their platforms to third parties. These third parties can be payment institutions, aggregators, but it can also be the customers themselves. E-commerce was also picking up in the previous years, but because of the coronavirus, became very important. If a company does not have an e-commerce, let's say, presence, most likely they're losing a lot of business to other companies. So well, this is very important.
Yanis, I like to call this as the digital silver line of the Corona COVID cloud, right? The dark clouds of Corona has a silver line called as digital.
It seems that Corona expedited a lot of processes.
Absolutely.
That normally take some years to happen. Now they happen within 3 months.
Accelerated, right? So I have to ask you a question before we move to the next panelist, Yanis. So you actually have seen it from the top, right? You've been
yes.
a leader, you've sat on boards of banks. Tell me, if you were to make a measurement, if I was to say, how would you measure the impact if I was to go through a digital transformation, what we call as the changing digital landscape for SME banking? At the end of the day, what matters from the top? How would you like to see the performance measures to be laid out?
Taking the side of the bank is the normal things that the banker would expect from banking. So we would expect to see profitability per customer go up. We would like to see cross-selling to customers go up. So a customer, instead of using a single product, using several services of the bank. By the way, I have an observation here. Most of the bankers, even the digital bankers, they like to speak about products. To me, a product is not what a bank does. Maybe somebody that produces shampoos has products, but banking is services. It's an ongoing relationship. It's not a product you sell and then you forget about it. It's a relationship. It's services. So you have to improve the services. And the other things that measure success is how many new customers you gain, measures like that. At the end of the day, however, it is profitability per customer. If you can have the profitability increased by 10%, you have a 10% end result in your books.
End of the day, it's all
profitability also, as you understand, is affected by the cost of operations. So if you can manage to digitize the whole process, you reduce the cost of operating, and that increases the profitability.
Fascinating.
Ram, if I may add just one thing, if it's possible. First of all, I was a bit surprised in the results of the point that you shared before, because everyone shared the end-to-end digital, if I recall, right?
Right.
I would take the first one. Try to have the best user experience, best-in-class user experience. Because when you are creating, a process, digital process, you can create a business process end-to-end digital process that takes 5 steps. So an enormous kind of interaction, or 2 steps, right? A very streamlined process. We can debate about which is the best user experience between the two. This is not a part of being digital. This is using the digital tools, the digital feedback from the customer to improve and streamline user experience, right? First one. Second, what we observe from our position, having a platform in terms of needs of the SME nowadays, we saw that creating an ecosystem, you can best match the needs that each SME can have that can change during the life cycle that they have, because depending on each stage that they have, someone can be in a startup stage, another can be in a business as usual stage, another can be in a growth stage in their maturity stage, right? Growing. And each single stage can have different needs, right? So being in an ecosystem, in a platform, you can easily, if the platform owner can pull the right stakeholder in the platform, the majority of the most stakeholder, the SME can satisfy more needs, right? I'll give you an example. In the COVID times, as you can, and also James rightly, I think, raised, the point is that everyone need to have a digital presence, a digital expression of their services or the products. The platform has created a specific section for delivering e-commerce services and for also build directly with the SME specific digital presence, because now they need something like that. They need to have a knowledge. They need to have someone that can let them to be digitalized in that sense.
Interesting, very interesting. Well, maybe there's a reason why you call yourself as in good hands at NBF.
We are trying. We are trying to do our best.
No, I thank you for that input, David. And Yanis, before I let you go, I want to ask a question, and then we'll take maybe participant questions later in the session today. Just one last point. I know you've been very, very passionate about prioritizing and picking those processes that actually are frequently used. And right. You've been an advocate of making sure that you don't do everything at the same time, but make the right choices. If you can take 30 seconds to just give your thoughts on that, please.
Yeah, I would say, as it is in every big project, if you take digitalization of the SME, let's say, processes, it's a number of processes. And usually in a traditional bank, they are operated by different departments. So banks are organized in departments. A department does some job, then it passes the work to the next department and so on. Digitizing means that you have to change all that landscape. So it's a very big change for the organization. That's why I needed the top management commitment right from the start. Correct. If you leave it to the heads of the departments, they will try to preserve whatever kingdoms they have established. Right?
Well,
so you need to break that. The worst thing that happens in digitalization is have a process which is broken. Yeah. So some part is automated, and then all of a sudden it goes to people to do some work, backlogs are created there, and there is no consistent response back to the customer.
I think there is, you have a resonation from David. David, yeah, you're resonating?
Ram, I think that I love what you said, James, really, because it's so true. We knew at the beginning that kind of risk that we could take. And we decided to have a specific teams, because we are operating in Agile, a specific team with all part of the components of different departments, but we act as a startup, having the management committee of the bank as a board of this kind of startup. And each single time phases, trying to collect the funds to have more oxygen to be alive as a startup in the next phase. This is something that has leveraged in the team, something much more sharpening, much more the customer orientation and the efficiency, and of course also the collaboration and the focus. This something is really, really true.
Excellent. No, I'm glad we are sharing this, and I'm sure there is a lot of people out there listening to both of you and who would find this piece of advice extremely valuable. Yeah. So
Ram, the last point to that, it's very important if you go digital to be transparent to the customer. So things that in the banks in the past were kept behind the scenes, now they have to be transparent. I know a lot of banks in Europe, big banks, you will be surprised, like the Deutsche Banks, etc., where the customer applies for something and has no idea when he will get an answer, and why he doesn't get the answer when he expected it. So you need to be very transparent.
So it's all out there for everyone to see, yeah? So thanks for that, Yanis, and I guess I'll need to just keep the tab on time. Let's see some interesting stuff that someone wanted to share here. We saw some global definitions. Very interestingly, and many people may not really know this, but the contribution of SME as a sector to the GDP, for many countries, including the US and UK, and you see UK and UAE and Turkey operate at more than 50%, right? I mean, that is some number. And when we are talking about the changing landscape, it's almost like changing the landscape for what matters to half the GDP, right? I mean, it can't get better than that. And also, if you look at the workforce contribution, it's amazing that in countries such as UAE, almost 86% of the workforce actually focus on SME. The US is actually at 38, UK is 51. You see India is at 40. Singapore, as you can see, is 72. So the point I'm trying to drive here is that, the conversation that we're having today in this platform has a much higher significance than what any generic normal topic would be. With that, if I can actually go back to the next poll to our audience, because they've been kept away from a poll for some time. So here we are with the poll number 3. So if you were to actually look at the, let me launch the poll there. What would be the single most significant impact that you believe is likely to emerge from a digital SME landscape? The poll time starts now. We have, is it about faster and easier onboarding, which helps with a better experience? Is it about having a larger reach and a wider reach and therefore enhancing your portfolio? Is it about having different products to different segments and therefore differentiating your segments better? Or is it about straight through processing or STP and digital fulfillment, which eventually helps in improving efficiency, which improves your profitability? So is it about customer experience? Is it about enhancing the portfolio? Is it about differentiated segments and products? Or is it about efficiency improvement? Not that any of them are less important. The question is, what is the most significant impact creator in your view? And you can see the polling is still on. We have another 30 seconds before we close the poll. It's pretty hard to choose amongst this, isn't it, Sagar?
That's true. That's true. It's very hard to put a finger on one of them.
Been kind of giving, our audience are also smart, right? I don't think they are clearly
comment. That's why let's wait.
let's wait. And and generally speaking, you'll find that our it's almost like a democratic process, right? Where you actually understand where the preferences are. So maybe I will, in the next 10 seconds, close the poll. And the audience seems to actually be resonating with what we just spoke. It seems to be an equal distribution across all the 4. So yeah, so that's
interesting.
That's interesting there. Well, we go to a question for you then, Sagar.
Sure.
And maybe I'm going to ask you, well, we actually had bankers share their perspective, and it was interesting to see it from, someone who's driving the whole transformation, someone who's seen it from the top. Maybe I'm going to ask you a question. How is digital adoption different, from what would be a normal technology transformation, and especially when it comes to SME banking, Sagar?
Got it. So thanks, Ram. And I know there are quite a few bankers attending the session. And they've closely worked with the SME customers and aware of different aspects of digital banking. So what I intend to talk now is our experience as a solution provider in this ecosystem, and possibly will highlight some of those aspects that have higher impact on this digital banking journey. Now, one point here is, and that's a pertinent question in terms of multiple stakeholders involved, different variables involved. How do we have a standardized product offering? In every country or region will have its own norms or KYC, and then onboarding requirements will be different. Similarly, there will be various third-party applications to interface or AML, credit check, and all other processes. And then add to that, every bank will have its own independent, different processes that has come out over a period of time, all these manual processes and so on. They will have different applications, IT stack and so on. So with this disparate things, how do we come with a standardized product offering? And only one thing I can say, which is common across all these banks, is that the expectation is that the onboarding solution should be implemented in few weeks. And that is where I would like to just give some of the dimensions here. First is what we consider is that the SME segment is, all of us will agree with that, it's not as matured as corporate segment. So customer experience, localization in terms of language, digital gestures, all of these are equally important to increase the relationship between the bank and the SME. And this is required so that we can reduce the higher usage of conventional channels, such as call centers and RM or the branch and so on. Also, what is required is bank to have the process easy for the SME to understand. And I'm bringing in the transparency angle here as well, which Yanis talked about. So there's quite a few examples here one can talk through in terms of what is the exchange rate used, why is the exchange rate so and so, what is the interest rate used, what are the options to reduce that interest rate, how can you have communication on product offering, what is the eligibility for that particular product, what is the duration for completing a query or a transaction, and so on and so forth. Now, what we also realized is some of the challenges while going for digitization is that banks typically want to retain their existing forms and processes. Now, there is always an inclination to have coexistence of manual and digital processes, and to the extent that they would like the manual and digital forms to look alike. Now, this becomes a challenge to a digital solution. And so banks will need to have a look at adopting new processes or align the processes to reap the digitization benefits fully. There's also a lot of focus in digitization towards customer-facing journeys, and there is relatively less focus if you look at the internal process digitization. A lot of times this leads to duplication of work. And I can cite through examples here. So banks would like to complete the onboarding through the digital channel, but when it comes to moving the data into core banking, it is all done manually. Similarly, while the customer onboarding is digitized, the product onboarding or the allocation is done manually. Now, having said all of this, we also seen that banks delay the digital onboarding because the complete STP is not in place. But even with the current technology enablers, the accelerators, even what is possible is 70% improvement in timeline and cost optimization. With the regulators also opening up the framework more and more, we can look at achieving that STP in coming time. So banks should not stop taking strides into digitizing, waiting for full STP. So these are the points I can bring.
So, I mean, so you touched about some of the raw nerves that banks really.
I try to make it practical.
I mean, the whole idea.
These are the things we face, and these are the things we try and solve day in, day out. That's
where the value of this webinar is, and I'm sure that's what the audience is looking to hear. Listen, I mean, you talked about weeks in getting digital onboarding on play. Talk to me about time to market. How critical is it? What is different in, we had Yanis talk about COVID situation. I think people want digital as of yesterday. So what's your experience?
Yeah, you touched the right one. The point is, in the current situation now, it has become more and more demanding in terms of how the projects have to be expedited. So yeah, there is an expectation of a quick launch for the initial solution, and also that the further updates have to be quicker, and it will be applicable both for the onboarding engagement as well as the servicing and the banking requirements. Now, we have come across these situations, have been able to do all of this with some of the things that we really follow as guiding principles. Firstly is that there is no one-size-fits-all solution that is available in terms of SME onboarding, or it is linked to mainly the regulatory framework of the region or the specific country, also the parameters which are specific to that geography. So what is important to have the pre-built assets which are really global in their usage, and they can be then customized to that specific country or that specific regional needs. With that offered, then you can get very close to the single product offering that can cater to the markets across the globe. This is where I started with in terms of having that standardized product offering. A few instances here, we know UAE introduced UAE Pass, UK has Company House, India has Aadhaar. Other countries are also catching up on that. So what is required is that the solution should be quickly able to integrate with some of these new systems that are coming up, with most of the countries now coming up to that bandwagon. Two, the solution should be able to quickly address the newer things or the trends in digital landscape. So what I mean here is video KYC, digital sign like DocuSign, or facial recognition, document annotation, OCR capture for standard documents like national ID or passport, and so on. Lastly, what I can add is that the SME onboarding process, it currently tends to be more complex with multiple touch points. I mean, if you look at the onboarding, against retail onboarding, you have only customer touch point normally at the beginning of the journey, but there are multiple in case of SMEs. So according to the SME onboarding solution should be a combination of such small, loosely coupled journeys. Multiple of them, like customer authentication, dedupe, capture the customer information, AML, and so on and so forth. So if you have a combination of short, loosely coupled journeys, it's very easy to reduce the onboarding time, and also makes it easier if the process change is required at a future date.
Very interesting, yeah. Good old days when I was going to, when I was going to school, there was, I used to be in a place where my public transport was a little far away. So I used to take a bicycle, go some distance, leave the cycle there, and then jump onto a public transport, get off somewhere and walk a distance. So you're saying you need to have multiple journeys before you reach your destination. Yeah, different formats out there. Interesting, very interesting. Loosely coupled multiple journeys.
That's
Any
correct.
example that stands out in your experience that you want to talk about, sir?
So I can actually talk through some of the examples here. There are quite a few. I will just choose a few. What we have done with one of the UAE banks, and they had different digital banking solutions, one for retail customers, another for SME customers. And what they finally had is a single solution for both the segments, which ensured there is more stickiness for the bank for both the segments. In addition, from a technology point of view, it was very easy because they had to maintain a single solution instead of two disparate solutions. Similarly, what we have come across in Cambodia and Southeast Asian market is to extend the solution to supply chain financing and possibly look at aligning corporate banking and SME banking. So banks can look at ease of onboarding for the suppliers and the dealers of corporate customers based on the corporate customers' credit line and so on, and get these suppliers or dealers of the corporate customer quickly onboarded with minimal KYC. Similarly, another thing that we came across was how banks are effectively using digital for process efficiency and even cutting down costs. This was visible in Malaysia and in Indonesia, wherein banks used digital self-onboarding, wherein SMEs were able to upload the basic forms, and that was used to take the decision on which applications do not meet the stated parameters of the bank and hence were forthrightly rejected. So that really helped keep down the application that they need to focus on to bare minimum, and then the RM will only visit those for which the bank needs additional information and further checks and so on. Taking example of the Western world, meaning what we have seen is one of the biggest clients that we have in the US, and I'm now talking about the COVID situation. What we had for them is an onboarding solution working only on the tablet. Now, the expectation was in a month to 6 weeks to have the same solution extended to the web, because in these situations, the RMs were not in a position to go to office and do all this on the web. And that is where we were able to extend that solution onto mobile, and RMs are now seamlessly doing those onboarding. And this is now getting extended to multiple use cases, including NLP-based chatbot and so on.
Interesting. Well, I mean, thanks for that, Sagar. And I think we are the last 10 minutes, and maybe we have, one last question we'll probably ask the audience before we take their questions on as the panel. So here is the last poll for the day, and this one is for people who are the technology evangelists out there. What would you pick as the most critical attribute for a best-in-class SME banking digital platform? Is it about pre-built adapters that helps with regulatory compliance? Is it about having a full suite of offering that makes it easier and faster? Is it about fintech integration and compatibility? Or is it about the contemporary technology, be it about cloud deployment and use of AI and cognitive analytics? So while the poll is on, I have another similar question here for you, David, specifically called out for you. I see a gentleman, Vincenzo Casillo, has asked this question. So he wants to know, is there a, if you compare with EU, you see a difference in the digital transformation in the Middle East? And more specifically, are there, cultural and organizational constraints that help, that's a shift from waterfall to agile. Do you see constraints that you have come across? Over to you, David.
If there are differences in the agile approach, first of all, I believe that no one is applying a pure agile approach. It's always a grade of the agile approach because it's depending on about the organization, depending how this is structured, people, and many factors. But we are applying, for example, here in I think UAE, we are applying agile, and because for the velocity of the innovation and try to adapt as much as we can the solution to the customer. And the agile is the best approach that you can have when you really want to involve the customer in the project, in building something, and hearing about and listening him about the feedbacks and integrate the feedbacks in the system. I don't know, actually, I'm out from Italy from a lot of years, so I don't know if, I hope that in the last 5 years in Italy, this kind of approach has been changed.
Thanks for that, David. Thank you for that. And as I'm seeing some questions, there are a lot of questions coming in here. There's one from Durjoti Shekharnath, who's asking, what would you say is the latest features in an absolute must have in a digital onboarding solution? Well, all I can request, Durjoti, is just wait for 2 more minutes. The answers of the poll are going to be out there for you to make a decision anyway. And there is one for you, Yanis. And that is, what has been the industry approach with regards to trade-off between having an early rollout vis-a-vis having a perfect rollout, which could be a little later? How would you trade that off?
I would say it's what everybody would expect. You should roll out as soon as possible with a minimum viable solution, and then start enhancing that, take into account the opinion of the customer.
Excellent.
And to take into account the customer view, it's not just by asking questions to the customer. You can measure the behavior of the customer with the service you offer. So there are many tools you can do that. Check the clicks, check whether he hesitates to go into a page, things like that. And you can tune your system to be better fit to the customer need.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Yanis. So here we are at the end of the poll, and let's see what the audience have to say. Well, it's very interesting. You see that 38% of the audience believe that the full suite of offerings for an SME banking is the most critical attribute. You got your answer, Jyoti, there. Having a full suite of offering, but there are 2 other attributes that are seeming to be not very far away. Having an easier compatibility with the industry, an ecosystem integration, and having pre-built adapters, which helps you to align with local practices and regulatory compliance. They also seem to be closely there. What's surprising in Sagar, and maybe I'll pick this one on you. I mean, having rich contemporary technology you seem to be way down the pecking order. Is it because it's more of the means than the end? You have a point of view on that?
See, I agree with you on this. One point which we have to realize is that technology is obviously an enabler, and we'll have to resonate with what the needs of the SME customer is, at the same time what the banks are looking at. So I will look at each of these points. They are some way linked to technology itself. If you look at faster time to market, easier compatibility, if you look at following local practices, if you have looking at adapters to be in place so that you can quickly do the implementation. To a certain extent, all of them are linked to technology, but yes, technology would be a driver to ensure that you reach to what Yanis and David have talked about in terms of achieving that customer satisfaction, getting customers as part of the journey, and eventually arriving at the full suite of offerings for SME banking, as the poll says in terms of premier point here.
Thanks for that, Sagar. Thanks for that. Here's a question. I don't know. The question is from Ramani VB. His question is, how are the plans of the government and there's a need for having a regulatory, legal, technology infrastructure and going digital, and finding government has different solutions may actually spike the efforts of the banks. Any comments from the panel?
Maybe I can get started. I think the point is right. We have come across different governments have at different stages of maturity in terms of adoption of some of these solutions. And all I can say is that many countries are following this. I made a mention of that in my discussion as well. So it is definitely a matter of time before all of them will have standardized processes, all of them would have a standardized, centralized database which can be tapped into. And the processes that will be followed for onboarding as well as banking will be specific to the banks, but the regulatory framework has to be come from government as well as the central bank. And most of the banks, central banks and government are
Doing something.
Almost there is what I will put.
I think that's valid. In fact, that brings me to we have last 2 minutes and I do want to do as much justice as I can to the questions. There is one for you, David, from Tejas. The question is, the idea to build digital offering involves huge investments. And I know you remember you mentioning that you have to go and ask for funds every now and then, but then the whole idea is that you can reap benefits only via scale in digital adoption. So how do you strike a balance between channels, products, and scale? It's a tough one, yeah?
Good question. How we are finding the balance between channel, products, and scale. Yeah. When you are approaching an ecosystem, when you are building something, a platform essentially, the platform is not a product that you are getting live in the market, and you are just you're just checking how many of customers you are using the product. The platform is made by different category of users that they have different category of interest. They are interacting between them. It's a bit more complicated. The point is that the volume is the right volume for us is the vibe that you're creating within the platform between all the users that are interacting in the stakeholders that interact in the platform. Every single, we are thinking about phases. We are thinking about stages that we are creating. Now we have a first stage of the platform in which we are building all the stakeholders and all the knowledge base. We are pretty in a good stage, but the next stage will be more features that will allow us to also have different kind of satisfaction in terms of needs. So the volume of now will be different from the volume of the future. And then another thing, a platform should be open. The way in which we are building the platform is not a closed platform in which just the participant of the platform can use. It's an open platform. That means that different part of the platform can be used in different external platforms. That means that maybe you are able to open a bank account not being inside NBF, but being in a different platform. In the meanwhile that you are opening an account on, for example, in Amazon or stuff like that. So that is the value of the ecosystem. So that the KPI, this kind of balance, is something different.
And I think it's also emerging, right? I don't think there is one right answer, and things are emerging as we speak as well, isn't it?
I agree.
So I think it's time for us to draw the curtains, but I just want to leave with this one last word here. I mean, some of my team members, Fahad and Saloni, thank you for this. There's a lot of, if I was to look at the buzz that's happening around in the industry, what you're seeing here is, every single word out there, be it automation to trade finance, to open APIs, to omni-channels, to utilities. There's an overload of new jargonese that actually is you can see out there in the industry. But guess what? I think, end of the day, and I like the way Yanis spelled it out, end of the day, what matters is what the customer is going to use as a service from you, and how ultimately what does it mean from your own profitability and your, impacting your financial standpoint, right? So with that, if I may thank each one of the panel members and the audience for being, with us for the last hour. I hope this was useful. You are more than welcome to pose your questions to the panelists. You can still reach out to us and we'll be happy to kind of get the channelized, and hope to see you soon in the next session.